writing your own memoir or the memoirs of others. Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time on your weekend to join me. And a big thank you for to Pete Warner for finding me, so to speak, and giving me this opportunity. Thanks also to my son, Peter, for helping me format this presentation. And to my editor, Lorene Applehouse, for helping me choose some selections and limit the number of books I would talk about. Thank you also to my daughter-in-law, Laura, who's here by my side, handling the tech portion. I've written 3 memoirs, but I haven't written my autobiography yet because I'm still trying to think of a good ending. But seriously, as a writer, I welcome any new readers. The other day, I found out a new resident is moving in, and guess what? He loves to read. What will we discuss today? How writing can enliven your days as you ask questions of your fellow residents and family members. How writing can educate you as you learn about people's lives and learn from other writers. How writing can make you more empathetic as you hear about their travails. How writing can make you feel a sense of accomplishment when you share it with others and publish it. Enliven your days. None of the words I used in today's lecture might be considered original. Think about the fact that everything we say or write has been said or written in some form or the other at some point or another. Even we think of the Old Testament as the original words that have been printed, but they too were just replicas of the oral traditions that have been told for many centuries before that. But we make words our own through the lenses of our unique perspectives. Everyone has a story, or many, many stories to tell. Enliven your day by sharing your stories with others and asking others to share their stories with you. And in moments where there is no one to talk to, you can write. Types of writing. Personal narrative, as short or long as you wish to tell something. Autobiography, completely factual with dates and places, usually covers an entire life. Memoir, deeply personal, describing people and events in great detail. Length doesn't matter, but the theme does. You need a theme that will draw the reader along. Fictionalized life story, a novelization based on one's life. A writer often chooses this in order to avoid hurting friends or family members that may not be present in the best light. This was true, especially for me. I didn't want to offend my siblings. I had 3 older brothers and 2 older sisters because they'd all been supportive of me in my journey. And so I would call them and read what I'd written, the part that included them, and then they would argue or say something, and I would rewrite it, and then I'd call them back, and then I'd call each of my other siblings in order to make sure that they agreed. This was a lengthy process because people remember details differently, the weather, where they were, who was present. And with the different working schedules we all had, and the different time zones, we lived in 3 different time zones, and the lack of good Wi-Fi service. This was a long, tedious process. It went on, I think, for 2 years. But in the end, it drew our family closer together because we could appreciate what they had gone through. How to begin. Sit down next to someone. Ask them about themselves. Where did they grow up? How long have they lived here? How do they like eggs cooked? And if all else fails, ask them about the weather. Asking others about their lives can help prompt your own memories. Jot these down. Everything is fair game when you're writing about yourself. How I began. People often ask me, how long did it take me to write Lost Without the River, my first memoir? I tell them 8 years or 80 years, depending on how you count. When I was 27, I realized the older generation would not always be with me, and I wanted to have those interesting and important stories written down. I only returned to my hometown in South Dakota for a short time twice a year. I did my best to meet with my uncles, my aunts, my parents, singly or together, and ask them questions. Questions are the key because people don't always realize what hurdles they have overcome. I took these notes on the back of napkins, receipts, and even once on the lid of a paper cup. When I moved from New York after living there for 62 years, I had a hard time getting rid of books, for one thing. But I just lost my train of thought here, sorry. Oh, but I had kept that list. I found it in a file, and it brought back a lot of memories. How I began. When I returned to my home in New York, I would type up my notes. Then later at 70, I saw that everyone was getting older, and if I didn't finish the stories of that time, those experiences would be lost forever. Now an urgency informed my work, and I became a hermit of sorts, declining invitations and meeting only friends who would inspire me and my writing. I wrote feverishly, and when I had amassed many manuscript pages, I stacked them all on the floor, matched stories to the titles in the table of contents, and felt a huge sense of relief. Even if I perished in that moment, the stories would live on for future generations. Quote, it's not in the starting, it's in the finishing, unquote. My brother said this to me, and it was something that spoke to me even during the many years when I was too busy caring for my husband or wallowing in grief after my husband's death. These words finally spurred me to enroll in a writing class which would help me finally finish. Where I live now, I find myself again jotting notes in my phone or the back of a menu. As you begin, beware. Research is necessary, but it can take you down some rabbit holes. Here are 5 ways to recognize a research rabbit hole. 1, you are accumulating many books on a subject that only gets a passing mention in your narrative. 2, the single hour you have scheduled to research a topic turns into a whole day. 3, you feel it is necessary to learn everything about a topic before you can write a single word about it. 4, you rewrite your outline to better emphasize your new discovery. 5, you are amazed no other writer has written in depth about this side topic, and you start thinking you could be the writer that does. Both my sons were helping me with this process, but I would see Peter more often. And he came down and he said, how's the writing going? And I said, oh, it's been going great. I said, I've got all these pages. I had a big stack of pages. I said, I've written all of this. And he looked at it and it was in 2 categories, research and narrative. And he thumbed through it and said, Mom, he said, at this rate, you'll never write a book, a memoir. He said, you've got 3/4 research and a third, if that, narrative. So I put those wonderful books away. I still would love to write a story.
Barbara, were you primarily a housewife while you were living in New York?
No, I was a working woman raising 2 young kids that grew into teenagers, that grew into college age kids. And I was working all that time until my husband became ill and it was increasingly hard to get the doctor's appointments and manage to work. And so I don't know how old I was, I think 61 or something. I, I, I don't know if I made it to 65. I don't know. I can't remember. Yes.
But you didn't begin writing with intending to get published until you were well past 60.
No, I always wanted to be published in something. And as a young girl, I remember, well, I was probably 13. I sent something off, a poem off to McCall's, and they wrote a wonderful letter back. Sorry, it's a wonderful piece, but it's not for us. Not for us. That's what the editors always say. Well, I don't know how that poem, but believe me, it wasn't worth publishing. I mean, I know that. And then when I went into the Peace Corps, I served in the Peace Corps from 1963 to 1965. And during the Peace Corps, I wrote about a couple of experiences and had them published in the Peace Corps Volunteer, which was this little work journal that they sent out to all volunteers and families. And then when I returned to South Dakota, I wrote a series of articles for the Minneapolis Star Tribune, because my friend Georgia and I had traveled throughout Southeast Asia before we came home. So it was a series, I think, of 8 articles that the Minneapolis Tribune published. So I had published before.
And poetry has always been very important to you.
Amazingly not. Amazingly not. I never thought of myself as a poet. I wrote a few poems that appear in Lost Without the River, but it wasn't a thought thing. And when I came here, I'm in an assisted living facility in Bethesda, Maryland. And when I came here, I was in very bad shape physically. I had broken my back. I'd come from the hospital. I couldn't speak. I couldn't really eat. But I didn't want to be in my room. I didn't want to be isolated. So I would come up when I finally was able to come up. I'd come up and sit, and I couldn't eat, and I couldn't do much else, but I could listen. And I started listening, and then I wrote one poem, and within 10 days, the activity director said, would you mind if we published this in their little paper here called the Woodmont Post? And I said, oh, that'd be great. And it was published. And then I have a too small for my books and papers, but it has a wonderful view. And that's why I chose it. I look out at an old magnolia tree, and I can see the sky. I don't see the sunrise, but I see the color of the sunrise, and I see wonderful sunsets. I see the moon, and it just inspired me. And I just started writing up a storm. And then some people dream a lot. Some people don't dream a lot. I dream a lot, and I'm inspired by my dreams. And so often I have like sort of 4 in the works. And then my first editor, Britt Peterson, she would help me I'll do the line breaks because I write on my cell phone. So she'd help with the line things, help with extraneous words or punctuation. And it went forward. So last year, I can't quite remember, I think last spring, one of my poems was accepted into the 1-page anthology for that year. And I was just thrilled because my sons had always given me copies of the anthologies, the poem anthologies. So that I mean, I couldn't believe it. I was in the theater at the time, and I opened up my email waiting for the movie to start, and I screamed. And the people said behind me, they said, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" And I said, "Nothing's wrong. This is just such good news. I can't believe it." And my friend Joy was sitting next to me, and I said, Joy, here's my cell phone. Would you please read this to make sure that I'm not making it up?" And she did. So, and now I've written I collect my poems, and I did a seasonal, my seasonal poems is what it's called. So, and they just keep coming. I don't, it's amazing. So I was supposed to be working on, well, I am working on, almost there, to the sequel, Lost Well Up the River. And finally my editor said, "Stop with the poems. You've got to get on with this book." So anyway, that's where I am.
Mel, you break up the narrative in your collection of short stories. Would you consider some poetry inserted in there?
Um, I do a little bit of prose poetry, but I would never call myself a poet, and I would be embarrassed to try and do something like that. But there are a couple of bits where I shudder because I'm sure a real poet will say, "What the hell are you thinking?" Um, so yeah, I don't think we've gone over them in in our readings, but yeah, there are bits. But yeah, I wouldn't go there. That would open myself up to way too much criticism. I correctly as well.
Yeah, Barbara, you can continue.
Okay. How to find inspiration. As you write, remember that you must also read from the books you like and even from the books you don't like. Look for themes that resonate with you. Here are a few authors I learned from. Louis Frumkes taught me how to look for niche, fill it, and then send it out. He lived in an apartment building that looked out over the East River and observed the boats. His stories were published in the New York Times, which gained him great readership, his own column in that paper, best-selling books, and a position as a creative writing director. Anne McDermott taught me to describe household chores, various rooms in a residence, and to write from several characters' points of view. So I was writing at the time, I was working on, I had written 3 pages on how my mother did her laundry, how difficult it was. In winter in Northeast and South Dakota, you hang the clothes out. You first boil things and blue things and hang them out, and they get stiff and dry, and you bring them in and put in the basement, so forth and so on. And I gave it to a friend here. I really recommend. I mean, I always listened to what she said. And she looked at that and she said, "Oh, Barbara," she said, "that's boring." She said, "Nobody wants to hear about dirty and wet clothes." And then I read Anne McDermott, and doing the same thing. She is a young woman, and her mother, they wrote 13 pages about doing the laundry. So I left all my words in. Asia Cherba taught me about the misunderstandings that can take place when characters hear the same words, but understand things differently. This happens more often than you would think. Here in my assisted living facility, it happens often, sometimes with humorous results. Celeste Ng taught me the importance of placing characters firmly in location, as well as the hidden faces of love, and how different nationalities express love in different ways. In her book, she describes in detail about wind, dust, mud, water. I'd done that in my first memoir, but I used her techniques in later writing. This helped me resolve my conflicting feelings of my paternal grandmother. At one point, so my maternal I was the youngest of 7 children. I was sort of tacked on at the end. And my mother always had the incredible chore of caring for my oldest sister, who was crib bound from birth. She couldn't talk, she couldn't speak. She never got out of the crib and she had trouble swallowing. Um, so my paternal grandmother, I would be sent there on Mondays, laundry day, to get out of mother's way, to give her a little help. Whereas my paternal grandmother loved my oldest sister. She made special treats for her. She made dresses for her dolls and for herself. And by the time I came along, my paternal grandmother treated me very bad. She never made anything special for me. She just, I don't even know what she gave me for lunch. And she was really rough when she gave me baths. So in reading, I realized that my paternal grandmother probably did love me. She couldn't show it, but her love was valuable also. That's what I learned. Let's see. And I was telling about Celeste Ming and the wind, dust, mud, water. So I found just by chance, my husband at that time was in assisted living in Washington, D.C., and he lived on Connecticut Avenue. And a short ways away was Politics and Prose, the famous bookstore. And I was hurrying. I remember that. I think maybe I was taking coffee back to him or sweets or something, my husband. And they had out on the bench, they had free books. Look at them and help yourself. Oh my God. I mean, I just thought, you don't know me. So I packed up, I think maybe 4 or 5, knowing I could bring them back and put them on the same place if I didn't think they were appropriate. But one was just called Dirt. And I love that book. And I don't know if it's still in print, but at that time it had been printed like 17 years before and it was still in print. And it's about a woman who grew up in Western South Dakota, which is much different where I am. And every chapter was devoted to a weed and how that weed affected the family and their fortune or misfortune. And so at one point, my brother is an agronomist, my oldest brother, an agronomist. And at one point I called him and I said, can you tell me all the names for dirt? And he said, oh, well, yeah, mud and dust, that's it. And then when I wrote my book, I had to read that. And, there are many ways of describing dirt. Anyway, I'm mixing sort of poetry with what I'm discussing now. But I've written a poem, The Dirt. And actually, one of your viewers, Pete, said to me that the dirt seemed to be a character in the poem, and dirt is a character in my memoir. I don't call him Mr. Dirt or Mrs. Dirt, but it's very much a character that runs through. It's a theme in my book. Okay, back to Celeste Ming.
Barbara, could you speak up a bit? I'm having some trouble hearing you.
Can you raise my volume? No, so where's that? Okay. Mm-hmm. So Celeste Ming also talked about blue. And at this point, no, she didn't. At this point, no, she didn't. She said I was using blue in too many places. Blue, the color blue in too many places. I struggled. I was passing a women's clothing store near me. It was on a dreary winter after weeks of that kind of weather. In their window, they displayed blouses in 4 vibrant colors: raspberry, forest green, bright yellow, and an unusual shade of orange. One week, I went into the store and asked the manager what color they called it. If I remember right, she said cantaloupe. Then I went to the paint store, which was very close, and bought a color wheel. I pasted it on the table near my coffee and scrolled through it, noticing that the colors changed with the light. And I've used that in my writing. Like I remember I really struggled with the new leaves on a willow tree. And they're just a magnificent color that lasts for maybe 24 hours. And I finally think I came up with a light chartreuse. And moving on to another author, Lon Samantha Lang taught me to involve all the senses and to use the perfect words for each description. I studied under her for 3 summer workshops at the University of Iowa. One of her first class exercises was take a common adjective, such as exciting, and replace it by other adjectives. She made this competitive. She actually, at the beginning of every class, went around with a basket. And she had a woman, Native American basket that she put them in. And the classmates would scream and holler and say, I'm expecting a call. I can't do this. And she said, writing, if you're going to be a writer, a serious writer, that writing and words have to take precedent in your life. And if you hurt somebody's feelings, you'll just have to explain later that you were writing. But anyway, she did this and she wanted a common adjective, other adjectives for exciting. I felt satisfied when I'd written 8 words until another classmate wrote 13. How to find inspiration. Marilyn French taught me how to write sparely, using few but very specific words to describe people. Many of her sentences are short, each word vital. Donna Tartt taught me to understand the interwovenness of people and communities. She showed me how to flesh out physical movements and facial expressions. This added to what I learned as a child when I wasn't allowed to speak. Watching expressions of my brothers and sisters was key. And also talking about the interwovenness of people and communities. I used that in writing about the little town, Big Stone City, South Dakota, where I grew up. It was, there weren't any Blacks there, and there was only one Jewish man across the way in Ortonville. So, but we had prejudice really bad. The Catholics and the Protestants wouldn't walk on the same side of the street as each other. They would cross over. Roman Catholicism at that time was very strict, and we had a very strict priest, and he told people that they couldn't go to masses or weddings or funerals in other churches. I remember my mother just being all upset because a dear neighbor had lost her husband. And she was, as I say, very, very devout Roman Catholic. And finally, she donned her hat and her best dress and her hat. And she said, weddings, I can avoid. She said, I will not attend the funeral of this dear man. So, yeah, communities that you think, look at them, they think, oh, this is a nice little place to live. Often they're like Peyton Place. There's more about the love triangles that were going on there, but I won't go into that. So one of the sentences from Donna Tartt is, I found myself looking at the ancient card table inlaid at its 4 corners with a diamond, a heart, a club, and a spade. Charles was scratching at the raised edge of the diamond with his thumb, his head studiously down. He shrugged a funny little one-shouldered shrug, a mannerism he and his sister had in common. I feel if a new writer or any writer just starts to observe how these little things can differentiate someone. And Annie Priot actually told and wrote about the story. that she went up to Newfoundland and she wanted to be able to speak. Maybe she wasn't there. It doesn't matter where she went. She wanted to be able to speak the language as the people spoke it. And she went to this coffee shop and she was sitting in a booth. And she was there and the sort of, well, she was right there. And these two men were in the other booth and they were planning a murder, literally planning a murder. And she said she just stayed there until they left, huddling into the corner. So, and I found that I would, in New York, when I was working and I'd grab a early cup of coffee and a donut at the local coffee shop. And I would sit and listen. And even there were many ways of speaking. There were workmen across the way constructing a building. And the way they spoke was different from the fancy East Siders, was different from the cook in the dining room, who came from Puerto Rico. So yeah, listen and try to use dialogue and use that in your dialogue.
Yeah, Barbara, one thing a number of our other speakers have emphasized, like you, is making dialogue and descriptions of dialogue very specific to the character.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. That's what I'm trying to say. Larry McMurtry taught me how people who appear to disdain each other actually love each other. He was a master of that. He would write about very small communities and how they would carry grudges with them, moving to other parts. And then at some point, they would reconnect and they would realize, often it was at a funeral, sorry to say, but they'd realize that they really loved each other all that time. Norma McLean taught me about street descriptions so that a reader could walk down the street at night or in fog and rain and not get lost. And how to place characters in precise locations. I read his books, all of them many times, but that really came through, and a river runs through it. So it was amazing that I went back to the Big Stone. I'm trying to think what year. The spring of the year my book was published, and there was a reunion. Oh, I went back 2 years later, and there was a reunion of both Big Stone and Ortonville people, and one came up to me and said, "My family loved your book. We shared your book with the whole family." And she said, we meet every year, every 2 years for a reunion from all over the United States and abroad. And she said, there's always a theme to what we do. And she said, the theme of that year, the year before, was taking your book and going to every place that you talked about, that you wrote about. And that was the best review I ever got. So they took book in hand and they went down to the river and they went on to the Big Rock, which is a character in the book. They crossed the bridge. They went to Ortonville and they went to Big Stone, went to church, went to the school I went to, went across to Ortonville, went to these little cafes and stuff. Yeah, that was great. So he's a master at that. Barbara Kingsolver taught me how family stories can differ depending on who is telling them. My siblings remembered events differently, the time of day, the weather conditions, who was present. This is a quote. What happened to us in the Congo was simply the bad luck of two opposite worlds crashing into each other, causing tragedy. After something like that, you can only go on your way according to what's in your heart. And in my family, all our hearts seem to have whole different things inside. You can't possibly be in charge of people who will not give you the time of day, even in your own family. So I refuse to feel the slightest responsibility. I really do. So this is just more about telling things as they actually are. Ken Haruf taught me how to describe place and how to end a chapter so that the reader couldn't wait to turn the page. He wrote very sparsely, but this is a quote. She stood facing out across that fence and gate and the street to the lot on the other side. Inside the fence, the shade under the silver poplar trees was shifting and moving on the grass. The end of quote. Ivan Doig taught me about how people in small towns all know each other and each other's business and how to describe gunshots. He knew how unpredictable the land can be and believed that ordinary people deserve to have their stories told. So I talked about the people knowing each other in small towns, but about the gunshots. So my brothers and fathers hunted for our food, and there's a different sound between a rifle, a shotgun, and a 30-06, and I tried to get that into some of my stories. Daniel James Brown showed me how to take time to describe a technique, such as building a canoe. In his wonderful book, The Boat the Boys Built, the master builder takes them up, invites the young new students up to the top floor, and there he's beginning the process of building a canoe. And this little boy, he starts actually with the trunk and shows the boy how far down you should go to get the most pliable wood. And it's a wonderful book and wonderful read, but the process, I think it took them, they worked hours and hours, and it took them months to get the boat ready to go.
Barbara?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. To summarize the last 10, 15 minutes of what you're saying, that great and specific detail judiciously used is often the difference between a great read and a passable, boring read. That great detail of all sorts is a great asset.
But now you just want me to.
He's just trying to summarize what you just said.
Oh, okay. But do I need to hurry? Oh, I don't need to hurry. Okay. Okay. I collect words, especially multisyllable ones, the way some people collect seashells. My favorite combination, imperious nonchalance. And I was able to use that in my sequel. I cheered when I could use that. Educating yourself. When you begin talking to others about your stories, you open up whole new areas of knowledge. Examples. A man who worked as an appraiser moved into my retirement community, and he taught me about gemstones. For example, how to determine the age of emeralds and lapis. He had been an insurance adjuster for an insurance appraiser for Winston, H.W. Winston in New York, I think it is, and Tiffany, and overseas also. And so a woman here had a ring her father had given to her, and she showed it to him. And he said, oh, yes. He said, this is amazing. So the lapis came from the early days of when they started digging that out in Afghanistan. He knew where things came from and the value of them, yeah, how rare they were. Another was an emerald that he looked at and he said, oh my gosh. He said, this is as fine as the emerald that Queen Elizabeth has. So it was just amazing. Sam, an actor in top regional opera companies, talked about how to listen more carefully and with that, appreciate the skill and talent of the composers and the performers. Sam has passed away, unfortunately, but he would present short musical reviews and then he would talk about it. And I learned to listen really carefully. And I'm tone deaf, literally. I feel I now can sing if I don't sing loudly. But I certainly listen with much more appreciation of the composer and the singer. Dr. Bob, he was a doctor of theology, gave a talk, hosted a discussion once a week. All religions were welcome. And I talked to him because at that time, he helped me reconnect with religion. I was raised a devout Roman Catholic, but as I matured, my belief dwindled. Dr. Bob explained that by remembering happy family moments at Easter and Christmas, I could honor my parents' tradition. Yes, I began to feel, this happened in New York, not just here. I began to become very sad at the holidays, the Christian holidays, and actually started turning off the music, which I always had listened to full stop. I just, yes, I just no longer believe that, but he gave me that wisdom to honor them, and I can to honor their traditions, and once more, I love hearing hark the herald angels sing and anything like that. Oh, I mean, any hymn like that. So, writers
Barbara,
have,
you have many of these characters in the assisted living home, don't you?
yes, I do. Yeah.
Yeah.
People ask me why I moved here, why I had selected this place. And one of the top reasons was there were so many, not only writers, but active writers, and some of them very famous. And then I realized, in New York, I might by chance go to a reading and hear one of these authors, but I would see them like 2-3 times a day. And hear more and hear what they were writing, and they would listen and help me improve my things. And now, unfortunately, some have passed away, some have moved on to other communities. But I still have Joy Hakeem, Sam's.
And Barbara, if I can temporarily interrupt you, one of the things you emphasized to me when we were discussing your appearance here is how to go about interviewing, for example, parents and grandparents who may be in nursing homes or assisted living homes, and how to mine the nuggets of wisdom for these people without being off-putting or intimidating.
Right. So I will put this aside, what I was going to do next, and talk about developing empathy. Hearing other people's stories helps you understand that while you have suffered, so have other people, sometimes more than you have. Think about your own emotions and how they drive you. Others have produced their own art based on their feelings towards certain subjects. For example, I watched a series on PBS that detailed how the Dust Bowl affected many regions of the United States, but it never ventured to the northern plains states, which made me angry enough that I had to right this injustice by writing about it myself. I listened to that 3 times, making sure that they never mentioned South Dakota. They mentioned Oklahoma, Texas, California, Mississippi, other places, but they never got up into the upper plains states. Which, he sort of skirted Nebraska a little bit, but never South Dakota or North Dakota. And that is a key thing in my writing. I mean, early on, I write about that because I became a fan, talking about research, I became a fan of the U.S. Department of Agriculture's meteorological charts. And I found that in South Dakota, very close to where we lived, and my brothers say we were actually hotter because we were in a hollow, we didn't get any wind. The temperature in South Dakota was the highest any place in the United States. And the amount of rainfall, my father was amazing. He had an incredible memory. So one of the times I went out and talked to him, I said, Dad, tell me about those hard years of yours. And he told me, and I had that, and I still think I have it. I wrote it down on the back of I did have a notepad, but I had a little piece of paper at that time. And he gave me each year the amount of rainfall and the highest and lowest temperature and amount of rainfall. Every year he'd sum that up. And yeah, that spurred me on. And then the terrible, so in that area, people don't generally know this, but the Great Depression and the Great Drought lasted 3.5 more years, which was key because in other parts where things were growing again, the prices that they could sell and earn money. But my father's luck was just terribly bad because by the time it was good growing season in our area, the prices had gone way down. And he never recovered financially. They talk about, and the Chicago Tribune had a wonderful map of the dust storm and how it swooped down from parts of Canada down through Colorado, then did this loop over and hit us just like that, and then went farther and gradually, but it went to Chicago and went way down. So then Chicago, they published it, and it showed that map, and it showed where that dust went. So it went way to the East Coast across New York City. So I I always walked in Central Park every morning that I could, and every evening too. And when I went to Central Park, after seeing that, I thought, oh, you know what? I'm walking on South Dakota's dirt. I'm walking on the very dirt that blew from our farm. Of course, that's a far thing, but that's the way I felt. And so I felt I felt amazing that our country is bound in so many different ways than we think of it. But one is dirt. Okay, that was that, developed empathy. And sense of accomplishment. As you write down your own stories and see them in print in front of you, you will feel pride not only in your ability to capture your memories, but also in what you have made of yourself in life. Everyone has accomplishments to be proud of, and writing your memoir can be one of them. So I encourage people to start jotting anything down, show it to friends, show it to more than one friend, keep going, and then send out whatever you have. Send it out to a publication. And just be a local publication, small, and don't be discouraged if it comes back. We love your wonderful writing, but it's not for us. Keep going, and just doing that will make you feel good. Do I have time to go on? Okay. So this is going back to the books I learned from. In one very small book, but it really, I read it several times. It's the Memoir Project by Marion Roach Smith. The story's new theme now occupied that place of prominence in my writing. And then, what is this about being the main attraction? So you find, just try to take it down to one sentence. What are you writing about? What does it mean? So I had one moment. I have many moments, but I think the first one is when I realized my father, in my little girl's view, only expected my mother to serve him, that he actually loved her. It was when I happened to see him put his arm around her and kiss her gently. Even though I was still scared of him, it unlocked my empathy for him in his hard circumstances. Yes, I mean, it was very much a traditional family at that time. The wife always did what the husband wanted. She didn't have any say financially, in any way at all. And so I just thought, well, she thinks my mother is a servant. And we were, I mean, the girls were. The boys were a different category altogether. But so I just thought, okay, that's why he has her. That's why we're here. And then when I stumbled by mistake, the door was, I don't know, partly open or whatever, and I needed something as a little girl. It was a revelation. I was talking about feelings that can get you writing. So my sister Dorothy was, let's see, she was 12 years older than I was. And her brain was damaged when the doctor in the small town didn't know how to didn't know how to use forceps properly. So her skull was cracked. And one of the things that I loved to do, my mother washed the separator. So my father had cows. One of the chief steady sources of income was selling our cream. And she had the milk and cream. And she had the job of washing out the separator. And so she'd take a bucket of water and I'd tag along. And it's the only time I had her to myself, so to speak. And there were cats up there, and I loved the cats. So I played with the cats, and I felt really special when I held the door open for my mother. And then one day, I was doing what I should not have done, but I remember it was a beautiful summer's day. And Dorothy was in a crib by my parents' bed. And you obviously never jumped on the bed. And I just couldn't resist. And I started jumping on the bed. And Dorothy's there, and she can laugh, sort of. And she's laughing. And then mother doesn't know what I'm doing. And she goes, Barbara, it's time to go to the barn. And I still don't know what I did. Yes, that's gone. I mean, I hope I stayed and jumped up and down with her, but don't know. So find those moments and write about them. So anyway, back to the memoir project. Pack light, casting off all non-essentials, and along the way, knowing what to leave out. That's a rough one. And often we need an editor to tell us that, or another reader. Because once you start writing a paragraph, sometimes you just want to keep going. Another point, essays require the same kind of control as drawing. And control is all about choosing what to put in. So if you think of the great artists and some of the things they painted, Cezanne, for example, just focusing on that bowl of fruit and making it the most wonderful, perfect color. Sometimes he shows the window, sometimes he doesn't. But even when he doesn't show the window, you know the time of day by how the color is reflected in the surfaces of those fruit.
Barbara, we had a February speaker, Lisa Dale Norton, described searching for the nuggets in your personal history,
Like that word.
and then emphasizing the nuggets and just interconnecting them. Don't attempt to order on all the biography, but rather focus on the most valuable nuggets.
That's great. That's wonderful. I like that.
Yeah.
And then another thing that Marion said was, write down everything, even if it's just saccharine, vomiting, or cliche place markers, because you can always delete what's not appropriate, but try to capture that. In long form memoir, she says, the only way to find a structure is to first reduce your book idea to one sentence. And one of the sentences, I think it's more than one sentence, that I wrote early on, that it does appear in my sequel, my memoir, is this quote: my mother always carefully brushed the little heaps of flour off the breadboard back into the flour bin after finishing a baking project. She knew the price and sweat and prayers of planting and drilling and harvesting even one bushel of wheat. And then from Inventing the Truth, The Art and Craft of Memoir, edited by William Zinsner. The Louis Brumkes, who I mentioned earlier, had created this writing workshop, a 2-day or 3-day writing workshop. And one of the first times I went to it, William Zinsner was the speaker. It was wonderful. He didn't slow down his speech, but you could understand every word, and he had an incredible sense of humor. So at one point he said, how many synonyms for the word to die do you think there are? And people came up with, several, 8, 10 or something. He went on and on. It was hysterical, kick the bucket and keel over. And it was wonderful. So he had the whole audience laughing. And then it was serving a light lunch, I think. And he would just say, anybody who has a question and wants to talk to me, just raise your hand. And he'd go around and sit down and talk to anybody. And I did that, and it was great. So he said, these are some of his key points. That the reason he wrote his first book, my interest was to celebrate people that nobody has ever heard of, and who I was terribly fond of, and who I thought deserved to be known. Second, I think of it as a quest narrative, to put all those life stages together and see what they have added up to. And the third, a great deal can be done in nonfiction, especially in first-person accounts, where the writer controls the material absolutely. You get to make up your own form every time. And this is my favorite. You don't write a book using willpower. You write it out of love. Willpower is a weak idea. Love is strong. Caring passionately is what we are here to do. So how are we for time?
It's 10 after 12.
Oh, boy.
Take questions.
Okay,
Session.
I'm gonna say my final and then I'll take some questions. Sense of accomplishment. As you write down your own stories and see them in print in front of you, you will feel pride, not only in your ability to capture your memories, but also in what you have made of yourself in your life. Everyone has accomplishments to be proud of, and writing your memoir can be one of them. I wanted to thank, some people have to leave early. I want to say thanks for joining me on this spring weekend. As you can see, I'm wearing yellow to greet the season. And incidentally, the designer calls this daffodil.
Bill, are you there? Bill Weitzel?
I'm sorry.
I'm calling to Bill Weitzel.
Sorry.
Bill, are you there? Bill is also, Barbara, you're in assisted living. Bill is in a nursing home. I believe Bill is now 85 years old. And
We're the same age. I'm 85.
86. I'm 86.
yeah, Bill had a concept of connecting coincidental occurrences in his life and stringing them together. But Bill has had at least 10 very varied career experiences working in entirely different fields. And Barbara, I'm wondering if Bill undertook an intensive journaling activity, going over in his mind his earliest career experiences through his 60s and 70s, how you would interlace journal entries.
Uncle more stamps in the bathroom.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that.
For those of us who keep daily journals, of which there are several, do you have any advice as to how to interlace journal entries?
Right. Well, I did start journalizing too when I mean, I don't only had the strips of paper, but when I had time, I did journalize. And then I would take out one thing like, let me think, like visiting somebody, and then as I visited them again and what had changed, people were aging, so, for instance, I had a dear aunt-in-law, and every time I'd go out there, my sister and I, we went together. My sister Helen and I drove out together, and we'd make a list of people we wanted to see, and she was always top of the list. She had wonderful stories, so I tried to capture her stories, and then the next year I'd go out, and things had changed, and people had gotten married, people had kids, people died, and so I connect those in my journal. And then also I learned out in Iowa, I always had loved names, but I learned in Iowa that to collect names, so to speak. And there's a book on it, but to do it personally is good. So I'd be driving and I focus on Native American names, and I begin to realize how much the places we live, people don't know that's a Native American name. So Potomac, which is right down the way here, the river is very close, is Native American name going way back to the time of before the first settlers came to Virginia. And it means meeting place. And the reason it's named that is those rivers come together. And that's where they met, because that's where the fish was, and that's where the canoes came up. So that kind of thing. I also, when I drive fly into Chicago and drive from Chicago to Big Sun City, and along the way, it's wonderful names. So I wrote those down, and I haven't talked about tenses. So I tend to write in the present tense. Obviously, a memoir is past, everything is past. And so I needed to change present to past, which is not an easy task. You think it is, but it's not. And but I still love to write in present. So I take two exceptions in Lost Without the River. One is when men had always told the stories, and I have a story in there about that. But I wrote, now it's going to be my mother's turn. And I write in her voice. And I checked everything. I checked the age of the oak tree outside her window where she grew up in Pierre. Every detail I checked by talking to people who still survived. I went out there and to Pierre and saw. She worked at the State House. I saw the State House. I saw the steps. I didn't get a chance to walk up the steps. They were repairing them. But I saw that. I saw it at different times of day. And so I wrote that section called In My Mother's Voice. And then another one was when the night before I was going into the Peace Corps, 2.5 days before I was going to Peace Corps, my aunt had come from Pierre. She'd driven out from Pierre, and my parents and I were in the kitchen, and we were getting ready to go down the next day, about 90 miles to New Ulm, where more people were going to meet me to say goodbye. And we're all in the kitchen, and I see a light. We all see this light on the driveway, and I tell everybody, I'll get the door, because we're thinking a neighbor was coming in. That was the headlights shining on the gravel. And it wasn't. Our barn was on fire. I mean, the flames were already way up high. And I ran back to the house and I said, our barn's on fire. And I ran to the phone, and it was a party line, and someone was on the line, and I said, get off, the barn's on fire. And I hung it up and just dashed out, thinking I had to get there to town sooner and tell the fire department. And without even putting my shoes on, I dashed out and drove up the long winding road about a mile to the highway. And then I heard the fire. Well, I had to go down a few blocks to make a U-turn. And then I heard the fire alarms, and they were ahead of me. And I was scared to death that I'd be blocked out by other neighbors coming. And so I drove it much too fast. And when I got down there and got out of the car, I looked back, and my father was going back into the barn he had been in there once, got some of his cows out, was going back to get the other cows. And I just screamed, I said, Dad, don't do that. But of course he couldn't hear me because the roar of the flames was so high. At that point, the beams were about to crash on him. And then there was a fireman right away. I knew him, he knew me. And, he yelled, the other guy, man on fire. And they couldn't go into the fire, but they put their hoses up, making a V. And then when my father got close enough, they put it in on him. And they pulled him safely out. And the fireman fireman, took him down to me, and we sat on the bumper of our car. And of course he was, all black and hot and everything. And he said, I don't know, he said, that was a stupid damn thing you did. And I said, oh, Dad, I'm sorry. He said, he said, you weren't thinking. And then he said, oh my gosh, where's Mother? And I run into the house, and I call and call, and I go upstairs thinking that maybe they're looking for me upstairs. And no one's there. I think, oh my God. And I run out to the lawn, and there at the end of the lawn, they've taken all my clothes that I'd packed for the Peace Corps and put them in neat piles and put my luggage there so that I would still could make my trip. And Mother, left everything, all her precious things she left in the house. So when I was talking to Peter earlier, trying to plan this lecture, he says, what drove you to write different things, And I said, I thought they'd be interesting. He said, no, dig deeper, dig deeper. And I said, well, I was mad at people. I said, dig deeper. And I said, I felt guilt. I felt guilt that I, could have destroyed everything. So in this section, I don't do past, I don't do present, I do omnipresent, because the characters in the book, I wanted to look directly at them. The firemen, where were they before they heard this call? And I checked everything again. Everything I write is true. Where were the firemen? A couple were having beer. One man was enjoying his dessert. He hadn't given his wife any dessert. She was down in the basement because she'd added wrong and she'd spent too much money at the store. So he was enjoying, I don't know, pie or
So
something.
Barbara, we want to include a lot of evocative, meaty detail. Is a summary of what you've been addressing. Does anybody have any questions for Barbara if you haven't read her book? Anybody, any questions, comments? No. Did your mother die in the fire, Barbara?
No, they were out on the lawn.
They were out on the lawn.
My aunt and she were out on the lawn, yeah. But they had gone upstairs, and sparks were flying onto the roof. Everything was very dry. Oh, and I know what I didn't mention is that it was reported in the paper that a fire had occurred because of spontaneous combustion. Well, it had very little straw in it. There was great open space. The door was open to the haymow, so it didn't. But my father had hired a man who, he was a drunkard. He actually beat his wife. He starved his kids, starved his wife, and beat his wife bad. He beat the kids too. He was just an awful man. And my father, he'd become more and more unreliable. And having him became more work for my father than just doing it himself. So he had let him go, said, I don't need you anymore, and don't keep coming down and asking for things. And we had a propane gasoline tank on the partway down the drive near the barn to fill up for the tractors and trucks. And he had evidently taken a gasoline can and splashed it on the hay, and that's all it takes. It's one.
Yeah.
That's all it takes. It just goes up in flames.
Mhm.
So I checked again, I checked that. And it's not a happy story because what the sons did, because they realized with that fire that had been their father, and they took him out and beat him badly. And he wasn't, I don't think he was ever seen in town again.
Yep.
Yeah.
Is Rita?
Yes.
Yeah, just taking a break from Barbara chatting, could you introduce yourself to Barbara? And what I'm particularly interested in is the concept of one memoir book, two memoir book, or a series of short stories about structuring your narrative. Because Barbara has experience with structuring stories.
Okay. So I'm Bisvita and I am originally from India. I moved to the US and my first, well, there's various terms you can call side hustle or gig, was as a freelance writer. I was mainly nonfiction with travel and leisure and health, these two categories. And then I became a contract medical writer, and uh, I'm not really a memoir writer in the true sense, but I kind of wrote down a series of recollections of a career switch that I made in midlife. Well, I don't know if you'd call it a switch or you could call it like a second job or side hustle or even a gig. I began to teach music. So they are like around the one theme, but they are disparate stories of um, various interactions with my students, uh, my own performances and recollections of my teachers and the way we were taught music, which really started in India. So it kind of um, gives you a glimpse of, you know, the way India was in the 80s, 70s, and 80s, and things have changed. But um, so uh, I think the question was whether to make a book out of it, in which case, then that's a lot more work, or just keep it as a collection of short um, stories, which would be a lot easier. And I have seen, various authors, like they are a smaller group who have successfully sold their short story collections. So it can be done, I guess. So that's the summary.
Yeah, now there's an addendum to that. Barbara, this may horrify you, but I had suggested to this Lita that she insert some conflict, insert some tension, which never actually happened, to keep the reader flipping the pages. As an example, when this Lita was 5 or 6 years old in India, she was a great schooler in a British school, and one of the nuns rapped her knuckles whenever she missed the note on the piano. And I suggested to Bethesda that she insert some conflict, saying to this nun, if you ever rap my knuckles again, I'm going to give up the piano permanently. And then have that as sort of a continuing rail as an older adult teaching piano to youngsters, maybe insert some conflict with the youngsters or with their parents. In your first memoir, you do not insert any tension where there was none. But do you have any thoughts about dramatic structure and trying to introduce some conflict or tension which can continue throughout the book?
Well, two things. One, the title of my class at Iowa was actually short story cycles. And that's the same idea. You know, you tell one thing after another. And it is linked by, it can be linked by the people, by the community, whatever. And short story cycles, that's what started out. That's what I started out writing. And then it became a memoir. Or the other choice is to do it as a fictional life stories. And that's what I think you were referring to when you said you see things that have been accepted and so forth. That would, you know, so you would just say, as I remember, you know, and keep it real. Does that make sense?
Barbara, Bethesda is a very mild-mannered person. I can't imagine Bethesda getting into a knockdown, drag-out fight with anyone over anything. But if this mild-mannered, rather meek 6-year-old says to a nun, you ever rap my knuckles again, and I'm out of here, I'm giving up the piano permanently, is that acceptable as an injection of some tension?
Well, what I think I would do, but it's, you know, it's open to, I would say this, you know, this is what I wanted to say to her. I didn't have the courage. And then as you get older, you keep regretting, oh, I wish I would have said that to her. I sort of had an experience that's a little bit like that. I was meant to be a left-hander. But at that time, you were forced to be a right-hander. I mean, I didn't know that. My family didn't know that anything. So I went go to first grade, and I can't hold my pencil, and it keeps flipping on the floor. And the teacher, oh, she just nasty, you know. And she'd say, Barbara, pick up that pencil. Why do you keep dropping your pencil? And I was very shy, and it just made me feel terrible. So it happened a second time the same week. And she said, oh, you're just a baby. She said, come up here. She said, sit on her lap, sit on your mommy's lap, and I'll just rock you, you know. And it was horrible, horrible. Oh, so then I go back to the town, and I'm going to be married. And so someone is hosting a wedding shower for me. And she is going to be at that wedding shower. And I talked to my sister, and I said, you know, I can't even face her anymore. You know, I've been carrying this around with me. I want to tell her what I think. And she said, Barbara, she's a changed woman. I said, I don't know about that. She said, well, act like she's a changed woman. Be nice. Oh God, I had the hardest time. So I think you could do something like that, you know, throughout your life. It somehow comes back to you, and you don't do anything, but you wish you had. I wished I tripped her. You know, she wore heels, you know, and she didn't walk particularly well, and just put my foot out and she would have gone down. So you can have these things and not act on them. Would you try that? I'd really be interested in reading your work if you'd try that.
I wonder if in this situation you could also do like the child imagines that they're saying this
Yes,
to
yes,
the nun. So then the little vignette of what the child is imagining,
right, right.
how they're
Yeah.
picturing
Yeah,
what they're thinking.
yeah.
No, the nun actually did do this. She wrapped his Leader's knuckles.
No, I'm saying that Biswita as a child imagines how she wished she could respond,
Right, retaliate. Right, yeah.
which would be if you wrap my knuckles again, I'm out of here.
It'd make a good picture book for children, you know, with a little balloon up there, you know, whatever, tripping her or something else. Yeah, anyway.
Kat, are you there? Kat is a recent and ongoing cancer survivor and has a lot of tension and conflict related to that. Barbara, do you have any thoughts for Kat as to how to weather the many dark moments in her memoir with stories of personal empowerment and optimism, how to balance confronting potential death and arduous treatment with success? I'm empowered. I've taken my own care into my own hand, and I'm a winner.
Right. Well, I do that somewhat in the sequel. So when I was a Peace Corps volunteer, we were guinea pigs. They later told us that we were guinea pigs. So we didn't have good medical care. We weren't always given the shots and so forth that we needed. And I almost died 5 times. And survived other times that could have been equally as bad. The one time I became very hot. I couldn't get out of bed. I was only saved because the workman in the building, he and I had become friends because I always addressed him the same way I addressed older people, any older person. And I always did things at a certain time and I didn't. So he came up to see what was wrong and realized I was so sick I couldn't get out of bed, in a lot of pain. And he alerted the teachers and they put me in a cab and I got to the hostel in New York, which wasn't that many miles away, but in traffic it was a lot of miles. And when I got there, someone had called ahead, and thank God, the one Peace Corps volunteer for all of Thailand came over rapidly. And she said, you have dengue fever. And she said, you have a choice. And I said, yes. And she said, go to the hospital. Well, the hospital literally killed people. My friend was there, and they never gave her medicine or brought her water or whatever. We had to have boiled or bottled water. They didn't have bottled water, so boiled water. Anyway, she said, you can go to the hospital. And I said, oh God, no. And she said, or you can stay in bed and drink as much as you can. And she said, I mean that. I stay in bed. Do not put your foot on the floor. And I said, well, how am I going to be able to do that? And she said, I'll ask another volunteer. It was just a small little place, but and to help you. And so with that, I lived. So the question was, I tell that directly in my sequel. Well, it's just still not quite finished. Almost there. Almost ready to send to the publisher. Then, of course, that's another story. What happens when the publisher gets it? But so what saved me during that? Oh, I know. I said to her, I have to have something to read. And she said, okay. And she brought up books. There was a little tiny library. She brought up books and set them by my bed. She said, okay. She said, no more excuses. You know, do not put your foot on the floor. So I did read, and then she came up, she checked on me like 2 days later, and she said, you're reading flat on your back. You've got to sit up. She said, you're going to ruin your eyesight. But she was wonderful. She was an intern who had just, I think, graduated from Johns Hopkins. And she had a small expense account. But with that small expense account, she bought a Jeep, one of those big, old, you know, those wonderful ones that you go through the jungle in. And she did. She went through the jungle with it because she had to go south of Thailand too, and the north into the mountains and everything. So I don't know. Did that answer the question?
Can you talk a little bit about, well, one, where were you in Thailand?
I was in Samut Prakan, which
Oh,
was not far. It's on the Gulf of Siam.
uh-huh.
It wasn't far, but at that time, no one in that small town had seen many people in that small town had never seen a foreigner. And
Yeah.
I was tall. I was a full head taller than most people. And the kids had so much fun, and I was miserable because I was used to walking out alone, right? By myself, taking a walk. And I go out, and this whole band of kids, farang, farang, farang. And then I could
I
understand.
remember that word. I remember that word now.
See the silly
Can
looking
you talk
woman.
can you talk about submitting your book for printing? How that works? How you did that?
Okay, how did I find her? Just give me 1 minute to think. Oh, I know. I was reading a portion of my book at Shakespeare and Prose, Shakespeare and Company, which was at that time there was, and there still is, I think, a store on Lexington Avenue, not far from me. And after I read it, one woman came forward, and she was reading at another place that weekend. That's why she was in town. And she came up to me and she said, do you have a press agent yet? And I said, yes. I said, I had contacted somebody at She Writes Press. She wasn't there with She Writes Press at the time. And she said, oh, no, I don't think you should do that. And I said, why? And she said, because she's such a popular one. She only has readers, read the book and give a summary, like 30-sentence summary or something like that. And she said, she never reads the book. And she said, you want a publicist that's going to publisher and a publicist that are going to read the entire book. So with that, I felt terrible. I'd already signed on. And she said, don't worry about it. It happens all the time to publish. So I changed to Caitlin Sumi Hamilton. And we worked long distance. She lived in Tennessee. And then she fine-tuned my manuscript. and I actually, I had too many stories. And she said, you know, she'd tell me what was appropriate, what order to put them in, help me through all that process. She really saved me and saved the book. I haven't talked about choosing a cover. So at one point, the publisher wanted it to be a little girl from South Dakota finds her way in New York City, something like that. And the cover art was it was a choice, but they all were dilapidated buildings by a river. And I hated them. And I called up Caitlin, my agent, and I said to her, I said, you know, they say like they'll never publish a book that someone's not happy with. And I said, how can I be happy with this? I was actually crying. I said, how can I be happy with this book if I hate the cover? And she got back to the publisher, and I had choosing a title. That's a whole nother story. So I knew it had to have something to do with the river, but there are so many books. I think there were like 27 books that had river in it. And I would send them out to my friends and family and say, will you please rank them 1, 2, 3? And then I'd cut it down. And then I'd send it out again. Okay, these are the last 6. Will you please rank these? And got it down. And there were a couple that could pass, but they didn't seem right. And at this point, I was dreaming about my book. I was into my book. And I woke up one morning, I said, Lost Without the River. That's it. And it was just in time to get it off and get the book printed and published. So that's that story.
Kat, do you have any more questions or comments?
I guess to rewind, you mentioned a woman's name, I guess, that you were already talking to, and how did you find her to have her help you go to the next step?
Yeah, so there's an author's handbook. If you, at that point, there was another book called How to Get Published, and it's actually by Brooke Warner, who at that time was, I think, the sole publisher of She Writes Press. And so in the handbook, it would tell you how to go about doing all these things. But as I say, I think she took her handbook and then she made it general. And I think that book is still for sale. How to Get Your Book Published, something like that.
I'm seeing The Essential Guide to Getting Your Book Published.
Yep, that's it. By Brooke Warner.
Oh no, this is a Ariel X. So maybe not the same one right now. What did you say the name was, Brooke?
Look at the check. Look at what?
The chat.
The chat. Oh.
I put it in the chat.
Oh, she put it in the, I see. Laura, who's helping me tech-wise, put it in the chat. So
Okay, great. Now I understand who Laura is.
I was going to say one more thing.
Thank you, Laura.
You're welcome.
I was going to say one more thing. What was that? I know there's another book when you go to do readings that really helped me. I have to think of that. Oh God. It's saying what you really want to say, or how to present, something like that, Laura. How to present?
Also by Brooke Warner?
No.
Barbara, getting back to Bill's case, I would advocate to Bill Weitzel, who I'm unmuting, that he focus on this wildly disparate career of having at least 10 very different, interesting jobs over the years, would you concoct one or two continuing themes if he wanted to interweave these into a compelling memoir? If your career has been 10 very, very different but interesting jobs, you would need some sort of connecting theme.
Well, I think it could be, and I think somebody here, I don't know that they ever published, but what you could do is just say, I've gotten this new assignment. I have to pack up. What do I pack up? And you could do it in different ways. Into my suitcase, I put this and this and this. How much money do I need? Where do I go? All of that. I think that could be the link between them. Packing up again, packing up one more time, packing up. This is it. This is the last time I'm packing up. And then maybe if that's not the last time you think it is, but then you get talked into another time, and you say, packing up for the very last time, explanation. That's what I would do.
Getting back to Bethesda's case, Bethesda had to leave video, but is listening in. Barbara, as I was saying, that Bethesda has several options based on what she's written so far. One comprehensive memoir involving both the medical field and the musical field, two separate memoirs, or a succession of short stories primarily about the musical field. There's not a lot of tension or conflict in the musical teaching stories as it is now. Getting back to a question I asked earlier, do you think it's acceptable to inject tension or internal conflict where there may not have actually been any, just to keep the reader turning the pages?
Well, then I don't think she'd label it a memoir. Every book needs to be labeled for the ISBN number and for the bookstore, so the readers can find what they're looking for, obviously, right? So I wouldn't go under medical, but it could go under fictional life story or just life story.
Where does creative nonfiction go?
Well, it can be there. Yeah, that's one of the categories.
Oh, it's a category?
Yeah, but I
All
don't
right,
know.
that's my category.
Yeah, okay. So I'm just saying that I don't know that some bookstores have that, some don't. But anyway, yes, creative self-store. Right, good.
And Barbara, on another subject, if I recall correctly, you go into other nursing homes and assisted living facilities talking up creative writing.
Right.
Can you just...
Yeah, I'm going to readings. Here, we're Brightview. I'll explain that. And I knew well the woman who was in charge of retention and recruitment. We just hit it off. I feel like she's my daughter. So she heard me read, and she said, she was in charge of the other Brightviews, and she said, would you be interested in doing a book tour? And we'll start with the first one. And she said, I'd come get you. She said, I'd make sure your makeup was right and you're wearing the right clothes, and we choose together what to read. And she wanted me to come near the holidays, because in here also, before the Jewish holidays, the Christian holidays, people become very depressed. They think about who they've lost or who they can't be with. And that was the idea, but I got so overwhelmed with other things that I didn't make it then, but I'm gonna go in, I think, toward the end of April. So then, in the meantime, during all that, this place has been sold. So we are now owned by Solera, and they have, I don't know how many assisted living and nursing homes near here. And I had given my poetry book to a man who visits his friend downstairs in memory care. And because I knew they both love poetry. So he has a book and she has a book. And I just found out yesterday that they use my poetry book at tea time every day. And they not only read the poems, they memorize the poems. I don't even memorize my own poems. So then when Solera, the new owner, heard that, they've now invited me to go to all their communities and to discuss and talk and encourage people to write memoirs. So,
And I understand, Barbara, that you wanted to charge $100,000 for appearance, but you settled for a bowl of chocolate candy.
a good bowl of soup.
Good bowl.
I used to have a glass of white wine to celebrate after my writing. And at some point, I don't even know when or why, I don't like wine anymore. So what I celebrate with is ice cream.
You find that most of the people you encounter at assisted living and nursing homes want to write, but just haven't known how to get started?
Oh, I'm discouraged at that point here. Somewhere along the line, the whole population ratio shifted from being a nice balance between Christian and Jewish. Now it's like I stumbled into the Jewish home for the aged. And with there, it doesn't matter about the writing, but some have written and some were in the process when they checked in to writing. And I've asked them, and they won't, and they say, no, I've worked all my life and I just want to relax. In fact, just yesterday, I was at the table. I'm often on my cell phone. Everybody's learned not to be offended. Barbara's writing. So I joined a table. I usually sit at a table for two, and I sat at this larger table, and the man comes in and he said, "How are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm a little bit stressed. I'm trying to finish writing what I'm going to say tomorrow." He said, "Oh, what are you going to say tomorrow?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I want to say, but I'm giving this lecture on Zoom." And he's entirely with it. And he looked at me and he said, "You look tired." And I said, "Well, I am tired." And he said, "Why do you write?" He said, "Why don't you just sit back, enjoy the day, enjoy all these activities?" And I looked at him and said, "I'll be writing until I die." And he sort of sat back, and I said, "Yep." I said, "I'll have a pen in my hand as they carry me out the door." So anyway, yeah, but I haven't had luck. I don't know, did I say that when I came here, there were so many people asked me why I chose this place, and there were so many celebrated writers who were still writing, and some of them passed away, sadly, and some of them have moved on to be closer to other family members. And with that, we have Joy Hakeem, my friend. Oh, and that's it. That's it for writing now.
Pat, do you have any other questions?
Well, I have to say that there's two other men, and they are gifted and actually famous. But I don't talk to them about writing. I used to, yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead.
No, I don't, but I'm thinking 1 o'clock is the end of the time and I need to run.
Yeah, we'll adjourn in just a minute. Ms. Guida, do you have any other questions?
No, just I came on to say bye. Yeah, thanks. Uh,
Thank you. I
Especially the
enjoyed it.
part about journaling and stuff really got me inspired.
I'm happy to hear that.
Thank you.
Bill, any other questions? Bill, you're muted.
I don't think of myself as a writer, but I do write a lot. And I wake up in the morning and I sometimes I write 1,000 words. I dictate. I have a Google Voice question and I dictate. And it takes, I like to put my thoughts down and examine them. I'm a philosopher, and I write it.
Okay, well, Barbara, thank you.
Well, thank you.
Appreciate the participation.
Thank you very much.
And thank you to Laura. And
He says
we'll
you're
be in
very welcome.
touch.
Thank you, Laura.
You're welcome.
You're welcome, she says. Okay.